Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for another deep dive. If you like what you hear today, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any future episodes. We're going to be talking about something that might sound a little dry, but trust me, it's really fascinating. We're talking about constitutions. We've got this college lecture on constitutions and the rule of law, and well, let me tell you, it's full of surprises.
Yeah, it really is. Between 1990 and 2014, over 100 countries adopted brand new constitutions.
Wow.
So you can see that these documents are clearly more than just dusty relics of the
Right.
past.
That's such a great point. Okay, so let's start with the basics. What exactly is a constitution? Is it just a set of rules or is there
Well,
something more to it?
it's definitely more than just a rule book. Think of a constitution as the fundamental blueprint for a society.
Oh,
Yeah, it
really?
lays out the ideals, the structure of government, the basic rights of citizens, and even how the whole thing can be changed through amendments. It's like a social contract between the people and their government.
So it's like setting the ground rules for how a whole country operates.
Exactly. A great example of this is the U.S. Constitution's preamble. It starts with "We the people,"
Right.
highlighting that the government's power comes from the people themselves. It's not just about limiting what the government can do, but also empowering citizens.
That makes sense. But if we're talking about limiting government power, is that the only way to think about a constitution?
That's a really interesting question. You see, there are actually two main perspectives on constitutions. One, as legal scholar Carl Friedrich put it, sees it primarily as a regulator of state power.
Hmm.
It's like setting up guardrails to make sure the government doesn't overstep its boundaries and infringe on individual rights.
Okay, so it's about keeping the government in check. What's the other perspective?
The other way to think about a constitution is as a power map.
Okay.
It's not just about limiting power, but also about defining how that power is distributed and who gets to make decisions. It outlines the structure of government, the relationships between different branches, and ultimately who holds the reins.
So it's like a blueprint for how decisions are made and who gets to make them.
Precisely. And these two perspectives can lead to very different approaches to how constitutions are written and implemented.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm curious, listener, which view resonates more with you? Do you see a constitution primarily as a restraint on government power or as a way to map out how that power flows? It's definitely something to think about.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about different types of constitutions. One key distinction is between written and unwritten constitutions.
Oh, like the US versus the UK, right?
Exactly.
I remember learning that the US has a written constitution while the UK's is unwritten. What's the difference there?
You've got it. The U.S. Constitution is a single codified document that spells out the nation's fundamental laws.
Mm.
It's like having a detailed instruction manual for how the country should be run. In contrast, the UK's constitution isn't contained in one single document. It's more like a puzzle made up of historical documents, legal precedents, and conventions that have evolved over time.
So it's like the US has a fixed rule book while the UK's rules are more flexible and adaptable.
That's a great way to put it. And it's important to note that neither system is inherently better. They both have their strengths and weaknesses.
I imagine a written constitution provides more clarity and stability, right? You know exactly what the rules are.
Exactly. A codified constitution like the US's makes it harder for those in power to overstep their boundaries. It's transparent and accessible for citizens to hold their leaders accountable.
But I can also see how an unwritten constitution could be more adaptable to changing times. You don't have to go through a complicated amendment process to adjust to new realities.
That's a great point. An uncodified system allows for more gradual evolution and adaptation as society changes. It's a trade-off between stability and adaptability.
Interesting. But doesn't that also mean a codified constitution could become outdated? Like trying to apply rules written centuries ago to modern day issues?
You're absolutely right. That's one of the potential downsides of a codified constitution. While it offers stability, it can sometimes be less adaptable to rapid societal changes like those brought about by technology.
Yeah, it's almost like trying to fit a square peg in a round hole sometimes.
Exactly. So while clarity is a strength of codified constitutions, their potential rigidity is something to consider.
All right, so we've talked about what constitutions are and the different forms they can take. Now, our lecture mentions three main legal systems in the world: common, civil, and religious law. Before we dive into those, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back.
Sounds good. Welcome back. Before the break, we were starting to explore these legal systems: common, civil, and religious law. These systems are like the operating systems for a country's legal framework.
Operating systems, I like that analogy.
Mhm.
So tell me more about common law. What makes it tick?
Well, common law, which you find in countries like the US and the UK, is all about precedent. Past court decisions actually play a huge role in shaping future rulings. It's like building a legal structure brick by brick, case by case.
So it's a more organic, evolving system, kind of like we talked about with the UK's unwritten constitution.
Exactly. Now contrast that with civil law, which is more prevalent in continental Europe and many other parts of the world. Civil law systems rely on comprehensive legal codes that aim to cover every possible scenario. Think of it like a detailed rulebook for every legal situation. Judges then interpret and apply those codes to specific cases.
So it's a more codified approach, like having a giant legal encyclopedia.
That's a great way to put it. And finally, we have religious law, where religious doctrines and interpretations form the basis of the legal system. A prominent example is Sharia law, derived from Islamic teachings.
So in those systems, religious texts and interpretations hold legal weight in courts.
Precisely. And as you can imagine, this can lead to some very different legal landscapes around the world.
Definitely. Now, I'm curious, how do these diverse legal systems interact with the concept of the rule of law, which we touched on earlier?
That's a key question. The rule of law is fundamental to a well-functioning society no matter what legal system is in place. It's about ensuring that everyone is accountable to the same set of laws, regardless of their position or power.
Right. And I remember that quote from our lecture that really stuck with me. A substitution of a government of laws for a government of men. It's about creating a system where things operate fairly and predictably, not based on personal whims or connections.
Absolutely. And to see how this plays out in the real world, we can look at something called the World Justice Project's Rule of Law Index. It ranks countries based on how well they uphold the rule of law.
Interesting. So how does a country like Bangladesh fare on this index?
Well, according to the 2021 index, Bangladesh ranked 124th out of 139 countries. This ranking suggests that there are some significant challenges in terms of ensuring a consistent and impartial application of the law in that nation.
That raises some questions. What are some of the specific hurdles Bangladesh faces in strengthening its rule of law?
One major challenge is tackling corruption, both within the government and the legal system itself. Corruption erodes public trust and makes it difficult to apply the law fairly.
Right. It creates a system where the playing field is tilted and those with power or connections can manipulate the rules to their advantage.
Exactly. Another crucial factor is ensuring the independence of the judiciary. If judges are subject to political pressure or influence, it undermines the integrity of the entire legal system.
So it's about making sure judges can make decisions based on the law and not on political whims or personal biases.
Precisely. And Bangladesh also faces the challenge of protecting fundamental rights, such as freedom of speech and freedom of the press. When these freedoms are restricted, it creates a climate of fear and self-censorship, which hinders open dialogue and democratic participation.
That makes sense. Yeah. So there's a lot of work to be done in Bangladesh, but also potential for progress.
Right. Absolutely. Addressing these challenges and promoting transparency, accountability, and respect for human rights are key steps toward a more just and equitable society for all Bangladeshi citizens.
Now, before we wrap up, I remember you mentioned this rule of law wheel. It sounded like a really cool way to visualize all these interconnected principles we've been talking about. Can you tell us more about that?
It's a great way to see the big picture. Picture a wheel with 8 spokes. Each spoke represents a key element of the rule of law, and they're all interconnected. If one weakens, the whole wheel starts to wobble.
Okay, that's a helpful image.
Yeah.
So walk us through these 8 spokes or principles. What are they?
The first is limited government. This means government power should be defined and constrained by the Constitution to prevent overreach and potential tyranny. It's about making sure the government doesn't become too powerful.
Right, so it's about that balance of power we were talking about earlier. What's next?
Next is accountability. This means that everyone, from government officials to everyday citizens, is held responsible for their actions under the law. No one gets a free pass.
So it's about creating a level playing field where everyone is subject to the same rules and consequences. What's the third spoke?
The third is fair and impartial processes, emphasizing the importance of due process. This ensures that legal proceedings are conducted fairly and transparently, and that everyone has the right to a fair trial, no matter their background.
It's about justice being blind, right?
Right.
Treating everyone equally under the law.
Exactly. Then we have enforcement of the law. This one's pretty straightforward. Laws are meaningless if they're not actually enforced. It's about making sure the system has the teeth to punish those who break the law and protect the rights of victims.
Otherwise, it's all just talk, right?
Precisely. The next spoke is transparency, meaning that government operations and legal proceedings are open and accessible to the public. Citizens have the right to know what their government is doing and how the legal system works.
That makes sense. Transparency helps to promote accountability and prevent corruption. What's next?
Next up is access to justice. This ensures that everyone, regardless of their financial resources or social standing, has equal access to the legal system. Justice shouldn't just be for the privileged few.
Right. Everyone deserves a fair shot at justice. What's the seventh spoke?
We're almost there. The seventh spoke is division of powers. This emphasizes the separation of powers between the different branches of government, the legislative, executive, and judicial, to prevent any one branch from becoming too dominant. It's that classic system of checks and balances.
Ah, checks and balances.
Mm.
It's like making sure no one has all the power in their hands. What's the final spoke?
Last but certainly not least is respect for fundamental rights. This one underscores the importance of protecting those individual liberties we all hold dear, things like freedom of speech, religion, assembly, and so on. It's about ensuring the government respects the inherent dignity and rights of every single citizen.
Wow, what a comprehensive set of principles. The rule of law wheel really does capture all these interconnected elements so clearly. It's a powerful reminder that upholding the rule of law requires constant effort and vigilance from everyone involved.
Absolutely. It's a continuous process, and it demands our attention and engagement, both as individuals and as a society.
This has been so insightful. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from defining constitutions to exploring different legal systems and unpacking this fascinating rule of law wheel. Now, I know our listeners are probably thinking, okay, this is all great information, but what does it mean for me? How can I actually get involved in promoting the rule of law? And that's exactly what we'll be exploring in our final part. We'll be right back after a short break to delve into ways you can make a difference, both locally and globally, and to leave you with some thought-provoking questions to ponder. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. We've been on quite a journey today exploring constitutions and the rule of law. It's really amazing how these concepts, which might seem abstract at first, actually have such a huge impact on our everyday lives.
Yeah, they really do. And that's what we want to focus on in this final part. What does all this mean for you, the listener? How can you take this knowledge and use it to make a difference?
Exactly. Because knowing about constitutions and the rule of law isn't just about passing a civics test right.
Right.
It's about becoming active and engaged citizens who can help shape a more just and equitable world.
Absolutely. Understanding these principles gives you the power to participate in that process. So let's talk about some concrete steps you can take to promote the rule of law, both in your own community and globally.
Okay, let's start local. What can people do right in their own backyards?
Well, one of the most important things is to stay informed about local issues and elections. Pay attention to what your elected officials are doing, attend town hall meetings, and hold them accountable for their actions. You know knowledge is power, and when you're informed, you can make your voice heard.
Right, because those local decisions can have a big impact on people's lives. What else can people do locally?
You can also get involved with local organizations that are working to promote justice and fairness. There are so many great groups out there doing incredible work, whether it's advocating for legal reforms, providing legal aid to those who can't afford it, or educating the community about their rights. You can volunteer your time to donate to their cause, or simply spread awareness about the issues they're tackling.
So it's about finding ways to plug in and use your skills and passions to make a difference in your community. What about on a global level? What can individuals do to promote the rule of law in other parts of the world?
Well, there are some amazing international organizations dedicated to strengthening the rule of law globally. They work on everything from fighting corruption to promoting human rights to advocating for legal reforms in countries facing significant challenges. And you can support these organizations by donating, volunteering, or simply raising awareness about their work.
It's inspiring to know that there are people all over the world working tirelessly to build a more just and equitable world. And even if we can't be on the front lines, we can still play a part by supporting those who are.
Exactly. And remember, promoting the rule of law isn't just about grand gestures or donating large sums of money. It's also about the small, everyday choices we make.
What do you mean by that?
Well, it's about treating others with respect, even when we disagree.
Right.
It's about standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. And it's about holding ourselves accountable to the same standards we expect from others. These everyday actions might seem small, but they contribute to a culture of justice and fairness.
That's such a powerful point. It's about embodying these principles in our own lives and inspiring others to do the same. It's about creating a ripple effect that can ultimately lead to positive change.
Absolutely. Now, before we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder. As we've seen, constitutions and the rule of law are essential for creating societies where everyone can thrive, but they're not static concepts. They require constant attention and engagement from all of us.
So what's the question we should all be asking ourselves?
What kind of world do you want to live in, and what role are you willing to play in building that world?
Wow, that's a powerful question to sit with. It's a reminder that we all have a part to play and that even small actions can make a difference. Thank you so much for guiding us through this deep dive. It's been incredibly insightful and thought-provoking.
My pleasure. I hope our listeners feel empowered to take this knowledge and put it into action.
And for those of you who enjoyed this deep dive, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future episodes exploring all sorts of fascinating topics. We'll see you next time.